Hello, this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. We are told that January 6th was a day of violence. We are told that January 6th was a violent insurrection. We are told that January 6th was an attempt to overthrow the government. We are told this repeatedly. We are told that supposedly Trump supporters arrived at the United States Capitol under the guise of a peaceful protest, but were actually intending a violent overthrow of the government. And despite the great presence of the intelligence agencies and all of the surveillance systems that they have, they did not detect any evidence of this stealth operation. The Trump supporters are supposedly that good. They're that good at conducting a covert military operation that everyone was caught off guard. And we're told that this would be the first insurrection, the first violent overthrow of a government where there would be no weapons involved. The Trump supporters came to D.C. that day unarmed. They were defenseless, and yet they were going to take down the world's mightiest government. How do you overthrow a government without any guns? And this supposed violent uprising happened, but not a single police officer was seriously injured. The police were unharmed. So this is the story that the corporate media, in conjunction with the American deep state, is trying to sell the Americans. Trump supporters intended a stealth, violent coup, but there is no evidence that that happened. And further, there was only one side that was violent that day, and that was the side that had the guns, that had the intelligence, and that was the side that was the government. And to give you an idea of the violence that happened that day, it was all one-sided, and people got hurt and people got killed, and I'm going to tell you a story of that. And her name is Rosanne Boyland, a 34-year-old woman from Georgia. And what had happened is the police had caused a stampede, and Rosanne fell down. And as people were trying to get her back up to her feet, she was pepper sprayed and tear gassed, and she couldn't catch her breath, and she died. Later that day, a police officer was seen beating her lifeless body with a baton. Or how about Ashley Babbitt, a woman who posed no threat, no harm to the police, and she was shot dead point blank range. So these are the injuries. This is the true story of what happened on January 6th. And now I'm going to give you a quote by Jake Lang. Jake Lang is a man from New Jersey who attended that Trump rally that day. He's a small business owner from New Jersey, and here's how he described the day. Quote, "There is nothing more devastating than watching men and women unarmed be killed by our police officers in this country. There was a concerted effort by the Capitol Police that day to actually punish the American people and hurt them," unquote, Jake Lang. Sandeep? Excuse me, I apologize for that. So what we are witnessing is a federal government that has gone rogue. It has weaponized and it has turned on the people that it represents. And so I think it is safe to say that the corporate media is caught yet in one more lie. One more attempt to disparage the American people. One more attempt to falsely accuse innocent people of a crime they did not do. But that is way off in Washington, D.C. It is on the other side of the country. Those are our federal representatives, and they are far away from us here in Texas. So thankfully, we have our local government officials that would not purport such a lie. They would not disparage the people that are their constituents. They would not weaponize their government against the local citizens of Fort Bend and Harris County, or would they? On the heels of the January 6th Trump rally, Fort Bend County Sheriff Eric Fagan held a press conference where he assembled nearly every police official in Fort Bend County. And in a statement of solidarity with every police officer, with every police official behind him, the message was essentially, Trump supporters, we are watching you. In a show of force, with nearly every police official in Fort Bend County standing behind him, he let the Trump supporters know that they better watch themselves. I'm going to read you a quote. Quote, "We are being prepared. You have to realize one of our fellow officers was killed at that riot. We are here showing that we are standing with the family, with that officer, and with all officers in the United States, and not just in Fort Bend. That, unquote, that is Fort Bend County Sheriff Eric Fagan responding to the January 6th Trump rally. He didn't respond to an Antifa rally. He didn't respond to a BLM rally. He responded to a rally that was his political opponents. He responded to a rally of people who do not vote Democrat. He responded to a rally of people that do not vote for Eric Fagan. This is the first time in the history of Fort Bend County where the police have been weaponized against the people of Fort Bend County. It is the first time in Fort Bend County where we elected an official and he used the resources that we gave him, the powers that we bestowed on him, against the people that elected him. I'm going to read you the next quote. Quote, "The mobile command staff is ready to go anywhere in Fort Bend County that is needed," unquote, Eric Fagan. And there he is. He's letting you know. Trump supporters, we're watching you. The mobile command unit is ready for you. The message cannot be more clear who he has in his sights, who he has in his crosshairs. And so now he is letting you know that the police have been weaponized against the people in Fort Bend. And again, this is the first time in history. But it wasn't just Eric Fagan that commented at that day. It was also Brian Middleton, the #1 police official in Fort Bend County, the district attorney. And what he said, quote, "We have seen enough and we have heard enough. And we've gotten enough security bulletins from the federal government to know that we need to be prepared," unquote. Brian Middleton, Fort Bend County District Attorney, responding to the January 6th Trump rally, saying that he's seen enough. He's seen enough out of you Trump supporters. You better watch yourselves. And there you go, the weaponization of the Fort Bend County government. KP George, as usual, he's got something to say against his political opponents. He's always pushing the political message. KP George, quote, "We are taking ample precautions." And you could see all these people lined up here. He's referring to the police officers behind him. You could see all these people lined here because we wanted to send a clear message. We are prepared, unquote. KP George, Chief County Executive for Fort Bend County, letting Trump supporters know we are prepared. I have to jump back to one additional statement that I missed, and that was Eric Fagan saying that an officer was killed. He said he accused the Trump supporters of murdering a police officer. He did that. It's a lie. It never happened. Okay? So we'll wait for him to issue his apology on that one. So this is the times that we live in. These are epic times, and this is on your watch. This is the Chris Heasley Show. And we bring you all the content, the information, the ideas that you need to take back your cities, your countries, your town. But it's on you. Everything is on you to get involved and get active, to bring law and order back to our local governments, to restore our civilization. In the American tradition, we have to have county citizens get active once again, get active locally, and take back their governments. And on today's show, we have an American hero, and his name is Jeremy Brown. He's a United States combat veteran. He's an FBI whistleblower, and he is now a political prisoner. And he is calling in from Citrus County Jail, Florida, because his political activism he's gotten caught up in this tangle web that I'm talking about right now, and he's in jail. But the problem is that he's having a hard time calling in from that county jail. So we're going to wait for him to get on the line, but I certainly hope that he can join us in this hour because his story is incredible and it needs to be heard. But with that being said, I do have G2 on the line. G2, are you there?
Good afternoon.
Good to hear from you. So I want to say one thing. I always say on my show that there's some to do, and there's one thing that every Texan needs to do today. You need to call Congressman Troy Nehls. You need to call Congressman Troy Nehls, and you need to tell him to get the January 6th political prisoners released. It is not enough to just expose the issue. We need action. We need these people released. We need Jeremy Brown released. We need calls on his behalf. I certainly hope that Jeremy, he actually did call in. We had him on the line, but we've lost him. So please, I hope he can call in again. I'm going to text my one contact that knows him. And with that being said, G2, I gave a pretty robust opening monologue. Please give me your opinions.
Well, first of all, your comment about calling Congressman Nels, I think that's a really good point, because the truth is, even if Congress members, Senate or House, want to take action, if they don't have the support of the people behind them, it makes them a little less bold, a little less quick to act. And we know that on the enemy side, right, those globalists and leftists that are trying to undermine the United States, and the corrupt politicians that just simply use war and grants and social agendas to profit, none of them need help from the people, because they're getting their help from billionaires and activists in foreign countries. They're getting their help just by circulating federal dollars.
Hey,
to
Gary,
non-government
G2, I
organizations.
apologize. Jeremy, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, man, very good. Yes, so glad you're able to make this call happen. We got Sandeep here. He's helping us out with technical issues. Apologize for interrupting. I got G2 on the line. G2 is a show guest, and my name is Chris. It's very good to meet you, Jeremy. Jeremy, actually,
Nice to meet you, Chris.
yeah, I think I saw your interview. You did the January 6th. You were at the event, and I believe that, yeah, I know your story. You actually you went home for some time. I saw an interview you did when you weren't from jail telling your story, and I know your unfortunate situation now. But Jeremy, if you could please, just, the hour is yours. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Brown. I'm a retired U.S. Army Green Beret. I retired at the rank of Master Sergeant, for which I spent 5 years as a Master Sergeant. So, I spent 3 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment with 1st Battalion, and 17 years as a Green Beret, serving in 3 different operational groups, and retiring as the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Special Activities Branch, which specializes in policy development and operational oversight of compartmentalized, covert, and clandestine operations. And so I'm very familiar with the type of operation that January 6th has proven out to be. Now, the reason I am in jail today is because as a 20-year special operator and Green Beret who spent my entire career learning, conducting unconventional warfare around the world on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer, I'm very familiar with what was going on with what most people would refer to as the first Trump administration, but really what it was just the culmination of decades of unconventional warfare being conducted against the American people. And so in November, after the election, which we all know was the most free and fair election ever, according to Stalin, Mao, Hitler, or any other dictator that you might want to ask, Saddam Hussein might say that he got 98% of the vote in a free and fair election. But after the election of November 3rd, 2020, it was very obvious that this was not the seizing of power, which is something that many people don't comprehend. The election of 2020 was the rubbing our face in the fact that they already had seized the power. And so at that time, I believed it was time to reach out to groups that I knew would be targeted in this new open warfare against the American people. And so that's when I held a meeting of the Florida Oath Keepers leadership in November of 2020. Now, the FBI is fully aware of this meeting because they had at least 2 confidential human sources embedded in a meeting of fewer than 15 people. I have those reports, and this is why I can so confidently tell you that the FBI was fully aware of that meeting. But instead of them approaching me to investigate why I was warning the Oath Keepers as to why they were about to be targeted for destruction by those who have seized control of the American government, instead they attempted to contact me under false pretenses, claiming that I had made social media posts that they were investigating. And the reality was a soft attempt to recruit me to further infiltrate the Oath Keepers. I recorded this meeting on December 9th of 2020 with their knowledge, and during that meeting I was able to get them to admit to things such as that they're looking into things that may happen in January, admit to the fact that they were working with big tech to chase down people that they consider a threat, such as people that might have the bumper sticker that Joe Biden is a pedophile. this was admitted to in this recorded interview, that they actually tracked down an individual, questioned him because he had a Joe Biden is a pedophile bumper sticker, to which I responded, well, you guys know that he is, right? And so this recording, which took place a month prior to January 6th, where two agents of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force were wanting information in case something happened in January, I immediately started to reach out to alternative media sources because that on its face, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force attempting to recruit a former Green Beret to spy on American citizens that had broken no laws and were under no criminal investigation, under false pretenses, I knew was wrong. It wasn't until I actually went to January 6th as a volunteer security detail member that I actually saw other aspects. For example, those same agents called me at 9:30 in the morning on January 6th, just out of the blue. Just so happened to be I was standing next to the presidential podium. Later that night, the same agents engaged in a text conversation with me, to which I share the video of Ashley Babbitt's murder with them and say, if you want a contact report, here you go. A American veteran female unarmed was murdered by the police, right? And so the FBI was fully aware of who I was with, what I did on January 6th, and yet for 9 months after January 6th, they paid absolutely no attention to me, except on March 5th, when I went public with my 20-minute recording of their recruitment of me and broke that recording down on a 2-hour interview with Brandon Gray from JustAnotherChannel.com. At that point, according to the discovery in my case, is when the FBI started to not investigate me, but to monitor my social media traffic, all of my contacts, just to see what I was saying. It wasn't until Revolver.News in early June of 2021 broke the story of the connection between the Governor Gretchen Whitmer fake kidnapping plot and the same command and control elements involved in that being involved in January 6th, where my story picked up additional steam, and weeks later is when the FBI opens up a formal investigation into me, and then I am arrested on September 30th of 2021 on 2 counts of misdemeanor trespassing. And yet a task force, a Joint Terrorism Task Force raid unit comprised of about 15 agents with multiple aviation assets for a fat retired SF guy show up with a warrant based on a domestic terrorism justification, and lo and behold, they magically find 2 allegedly stolen military grenades, as well as a CD-ROM with classified materials on it. And that is what they held me for without bond for 15 months prior to my trial, in which at the last moment prior to my trial, they attempted to give me a plea bargain, offering my freedom if I would just drop my option of going to trial. They were going to drop the explosives and classified materials charges because they knew the evidence shouldn't have held up in court. But luckily, our justice system is corrupt, and so they were able to secure a false conviction on 6 of 10 charges. 5 of those charges were felonies, to which I was sentenced to nearly triple the national average for similar charges based on Department of Justice data, and now I sit with a 7.25-year sentence. And the FBI is now able to say, oh, he's not being held on January 6th charges, and they basically made me disappear. But thank you for letting me tell my story.
I mean, that's amazing. I don't know where to start. So what G2, do you have anything you want to say?
Oh yeah. So Jeremy, on January 6th, what specifically did they accuse you of doing? I mean, you covered this. There was a lot of information really quickly. A lot of the folks that are listening probably have only heard corporate media narratives on January 6th. So could you just share with us
That's right.
what it is that they think that, or they accused you of doing on January 6th? What is the crime that started all this?
The actual criminal complaint that they showed up with warrants. And by the way, it was the exact same two agents for which I recorded on December 9th of 2020 that showed up with the arrest warrant for 2 misdemeanor counts of trespassing. All the same charges that they're using against everybody else. That's correct. 2 misdemeanor counts. A joint terrorism task force showed up with multiple helicopters in the middle of the day with armored, their typical armored agents, like they do with everybody else, to serve an arrest warrant for 2 misdemeanor counts of trespassing. Charges that would normally receive a phone call and say, hey, we have a warrant for your arrest. We need you to report tomorrow by 10 a.m. Instead, they do an entire raid with an ATF agent who testified that in his 14-year career as an ATF agent, and he was a Marine Corps Special Operations before that. In a 14-year ATF career, he has never served a search warrant on a misdemeanor arrest warrant.
Wow. And, you made one statement in there. You said, as they do with everybody else. And to clarify that, they don't do this with everybody. They only do this with people who they feel oppose this current regime. So if you were a leftist that went in and burned down a city in Minneapolis, or you were, harming people on a campus with a leftist cause, you wouldn't have these problems. It is unique. And one of the challenges, I think,
And I apologize. I don't normally group the enemies of this nation into the same group as American citizens.
That's a fair point. I mean, one of the challenges we have, even this many years after January 6th, and with the mountain of evidence that's come out, because of the corporate media blackout and the government pressure to suppress coverage, there are just a lot of people in this country that still have no idea what happened. They still believe January 6th was an armed insurrection. They still think that Officer Sicknick was killed and that the pipe bomber is a real thing. And it's hard for a lot of people to get their heads around the idea that this actually wasn't the case. But one thing that just recently came out is the whistleblowers that we're talking about, the National Guard troops that were available on that day. Now, what we know is that Trump suggested that they get 10,000 National Guard troops to protect the Capitol. And remember, they knew for weeks that this protest was happening. It was planned weeks in advance. There were websites where people could find out information. It was all planned, all permitted. And yet they refused those 10,000
You have
troops.
1 minute left.
And then, go ahead. So you've got 1 minute left. What else have we not asked?
I've got 1 minute. I
can
call back if you'd like.
Go ahead, but answer his question, Jeremy. You're up.
What was the question in?
Well, the question is when you were there, did you see an armed insurrection? Let's just go there.
So let me call back and I'll answer that question on the back end. Is that okay?
Yeah, please get it. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I'll call right back.
Okay.
The caller has hung up.
So Jeremy's going to call back in just a minute. And wow, I mean, that is an incredible story. And I don't even know where to start. These are amazing times when your government goes rogue against the people. Go ahead, G2.
It is. And let me make that point again. It was in April of this year, 3 years after, that these 2 whistleblowers came out from the Department of Defense, and they said with clarity in front of Congress under oath that the reason 10,000 National Guard troops were not allowed to, or were not used, were not deployed, is because there was a general named Flynn who was preventing them from being deployed. After this, that general then was promoted and given a significant command position in the Pacific, with the Army. So this was a thing where Donald Trump had said you should probably get some resources around. This is going to be a very big crowd. Donald Trump came out and said, disperse peacefully. Donald Trump said, protest peacefully. They hid all of that. He was still speaking when the police began firing the flashbangs that gave one guy a heart attack. They were shooting them down into the crowd. So the reality of the story, and the story that most Americans have been told are just completely different. And for people who want to understand some of what really happened on January 6th, one reporter has covered it extraordinarily well, and her name is Julie Kelly. And if you look for Julie Kelly, January 6th, search for that. She's got a blog, and she's appeared in different places. If you follow some of that, you can find out the truth of what really happened on January 6th. As we know, the January 6th committee that was formed in Congress was nothing more than a political operation. It was arranged to have hearings in prime time so they could be broadcast on cable news and corporate media so that Americans could see this.
G2, real quick here. Is Jeremy on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear
right.
me?
Yeah, so, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, G2.
All right, so your question was about the armed insurrection on January 6th. And let me just preface this by telling the American people, January 6th was a military coup operation conducted by rogue elements of the Department of Defense, the intelligence community that operates under the guise of working for the American people, and federal law enforcement. So with that as the context, yes, there was an armed insurrection on January 6th conducted by those in control of this federal government. And this evidence is coming out every single day. And it's funny that you should mention the National Guard whistleblowers, because just yesterday I reviewed that testimony with my attorney. And the key aspect, we'll put the dog and pony show congressional theatrics aside. But what these American heroes actually were saying, they were actually giving these uninformed members of Congress all the evidence that they need to prove that the Department of Defense was working in concert with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which isn't actually belong to the FBI. The Joint Terrorism Task Force are all of the intelligence agencies and military agencies that are at the deep state or administrative state's disposal, okay? They just call it the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force to make you think that it's law enforcement. It is not. In fact, this is how I exposed the very guys recruiting me by telling them that I was familiar with the Joint Terrorism Task Force because I had worked with them overseas, to which you respond, well, you might be working with them again. We'll see how this goes. All right, so the testimony of these National Guard whistleblowers clearly show that, one, people that should not have been involved in the chain of command were involved and were attempting to cover up their participation in the events of January 6th. Congressman Troy Nehls has exposed in his book, The Big Fraud, that on January 4th, the chain of command and authorization for the use of National Guard troops within the military district of Washington was removed from General Walker, Major General Walker, and elevated to the Secretary of the Army, McCarthy. Right? This memorandum was written on January 4th, okay? And so in this testimony by these whistleblowers, they're clearly stating that Chris Miller was involved, Mark Milley were involved. By the way, 2 Green Berets who are experts at unconventional warfare, both involved in the activities of January 6th, but yet there are other people like Chief Son as well as Congressman Troy Nehls that said that Milley and Miller were also involved in Department of Defense war games prior to January 6th. Why is the Department of Defense engaging in war games surrounding a law enforcement activity involving Americans' First Amendment constitutional rights? They shouldn't be. And so the fact that they were lying about who was on certain phone calls was merely an attempt to cover it up from people who, like me, understand how Army chain of command works and know that the Chief of Staff of Operations for the entire U.S. Army should not be involved in the planning process in a law enforcement effort against American citizens. And so those are some key takeaways that I heard. Not to mention the testimony that the Secretary of the Army, Mr. McCarthy, was en route at a time that should have been a developing issue, but he was already en route to an FBI command center that was set up to run a concept of the operation plan. Why is the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force have a command center set up for an event that supposedly spontaneously happened, that they had no intel about beforehand, despite the FBI having multiple confidential human sources embedded in the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the 3%ers, dating all the way back to at least, which we can confirm by documents, April 3rd of 2020. And the reason is because this was a planned, compartmentalized operation involving everybody, and it is the FBI and the DOJ's job to cover it up and to manipulate the narrative to convince the American people that the armed insurrection was conducted by American citizens, of which we all know is completely false.
And you're right. We do all, well, those of us that have followed the story know that. If you looked at the aerial coverage of the crowd there, you know that the crowd was maybe the biggest crowd DC's ever seen, and that there were a lot of folks in that crowd. It wasn't some homogenous group. It was Americans of all stripes that were out there. And
that's correct.
And so it ends up in this weird situation where the people who are most active in organizing and instigating end up without a problem, and the people who, in many cases, as you know, from the couple from, I think it was Seattle, who just went in and left and never did anything wrong, they're in jail for a long time. There was an older couple sentenced to long jail sentences recently, actually probably December, I think it was. It just hasn't stopped. So, but here's the thing. I mean, most Americans do not understand that, in fact, this wasn't a crazed, violent mob, because they see a few seconds of video that have been played for hours and hours and hours across corporate media, and they think that few seconds of video is representative of what happened that day. So what did you see on the ground there? I mean, who were these people?
Well, what I saw, and you know, my producer and supporter Jen wanted me to remind everybody, I never went inside the Capitol, okay, because that wasn't my task. My task was to escort the mother of one of the speakers, who was supposed to be escorted to a permitted stage on Capitol grounds. And so this is the number one card from the base of this house of cards, that if somebody would just pull it out, there were multiple permits for events on Capitol grounds. And yet the Joint Terrorism Task Force is arresting people for simply being present at events on Capitol grounds for which were permitted and approved by the Capitol Police Board. We have copies of these permits. These permits are out there. And so anyone arrested for trespassing on the grounds of the Capitol should be set free immediately, because why would there be permits for First Amendment events if the Capitol grounds was off limits? And see, this is the problem with the fact that the government controls the media that you consume. And see, this is also part of unconventional warfare. At every phase of unconventional warfare, there is one certainty, that MISO, military information support operations, accompany it, because they must control the narrative. This is why you no longer hear anything about the gallows or the noose that was constructed. Why? Because video has now been released, and then people like me might want to ask, well, who moved that into place? Because we certainly know it was captured on video, because the Capitol grounds is one of the most highly surveilled pieces of property on the planet. But see, they don't want that question asked, because what you'll see, just like with the pipe bomb, and great job by the Epoch Times exposing the fact that there was actual video of the very locations of the pipe bombs that could be reeled back to show when they were in place, and yet that video footage is being kept secret, and the video footage of the police response has exposed a lackluster at best response by law enforcement, or the moving of those cameras as to not capture any of it on. And so, look, the reality is that this crime has been captured on video. And just like I assumed on March 5th of 2021, based on my 20 years of special operations experience and how the FBI had approached me to be a part of it. All of those assumptions have been proven true by evidence that has now eventually come out, and yet it's being suppressed by, like you said, the mainstream media refusing to cover it. But there are people covering it, and the American people have to understand that you're only going to have lies delivered to you without effort. You're going to have to seek out the truth, but it is out there.
Can I just touch on something you hit there, though? You were saying back when you were tried, when you were arrested, and when all those other folks were arrested and tried, there were tens of thousands of hours of video coverage of the event in the city that were denied, in terms that your defense teams were denied access to, right? They were continuously kept secret, and again, just these
and still being denied
of a video were let out, and Now, some of that became more visible when Kevin McCarthy was pressured to release some, and he released a small amount. And then the new speaker released a small amount. And in one of those came out this video of the site where we were told there was a pipe bomb that was designed to go after Kamala Harris at the DNC. The DNC offices where she actually was that day. That's another odd fact here, is that you start finding out that nobody was where they said they were, including Ocasio-Cortez and Harris. So the video that shows where this pipe bomb was shows that it was sitting under a bench next to a Secret Service and a police vehicle for hours. Kids were walking past. Eventually somebody pointed it out, and the police reacted, as you said, in a lackluster fashion. But here's the thing you mentioned that I just want to highlight.
Well,
they let that piece of video out, but they could have gone back in time. Go ahead.
I apologize. We got a delay. What I was going to say is that the Secret Service also conducted a K-9 sweep of that area, and the reason the K-9 did not trigger is because it wasn't a real explosive. And that is how the bomb was able to, the so-called bomb, was able to sit there beyond a Secret Service K-9 sweep, and nobody discover it until the perfect time discovery later, which we all know is fraudulent.
Exactly. And so none of that could be explained, and if they don't go back and watch the video of people placing it, if we don't see everything else that happened around that site, it continues to make it clear that there is a fraud around this bombing idea. Now, of course, there is a video of a guy in a hoodie of average height, average weight, who is completely obscured in the most surveilled city in the country, in the most surveilled city maybe in the world, outside of Beijing. This guy places a bomb in theory, and then he disappears, and after all these months, no one can find him. Now, they've got cell phone records, they've got every bank account record, they have, the full power of the federal government. That one perpetrator can't be found. That's not a credible answer.
Hey, Jeremy.
If they simply look in the Langley area or the Quantico area or probably at the FBI headquarters, they'll probably find who that bomber was.
Jeremy, did you?
So you're saying like on third floor, cube 7. Look there.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, they could have just paid some crackhead to do it. Who knows?
Did you say Chris Miller? Did you say Chris Miller played a pivotal role in this covert action against the people?
Well, yes, and that has been reported by Congressman Nels. I've heard Steve Sun also reference the wargaming that the DOD took part in involving Chris Miller, a former 5th Special Forces Group officer, and General Mark Milley, an embarrassment to the Green Beret by his rotund physique, also engaged in these war games prior to January 6th. And in the National Guard whistleblower testimony, Command Sergeant Major, I believe it might have been the Colonel, referenced that it was a clique within the Pentagon operating with Mark Milley that constantly referred to January 6th as a Reichstag moment. Now, Reichstag is a well-known false flag operation. So why would the Special Forces Joint Chiefs of Staff, prior to January 6th, be preparing for a Reichstag event? Well, the reason is because they were the ones planning and orchestrating it. And I can call back if you would like.
Yeah, we want you to call back. We got 15 more minutes, so please call back.
Absolutely.
All right. Wow. So, it's just, I don't know. For example, Chris Miller, I want to think of that guy as an American hero. His resume is impeccable. And by the way, Mark Milley, before he kind of went weird on us, his resume was incredible. And he has this background of always standing up for, the right American values and everything of that sort, and having the love of the soldiers and the respect of the soldiers. And it's there's some serious chess play in here, and it's hard to make sense of, to see these guys go out of character like that. If at least that's my impression of them, my interpretation of these guys. But maybe Jeremy has a different opinion. When he comes back on, I want to ask him about the woman that he saved. But G2, tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I think it's great to hear firsthand from somebody who's involved and who's studied it, because they've been in cases and they've been tried and convicted, to hear the actual facts. And then also to think about some of the things we just considered. This testimony by the whistleblowers on the National Guard troops being held back by military leadership, who were later promoted, right? The payoff. That just happened 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. So evidence continues to roll out showing what actually happened on January 6th. But the problem is the average American citizen simply has no idea, because CNN, MSNBC, and the rest have hidden this for so many years. That's why I pointed out, again, Julie Kelly as a great source for people to go to if they wish to learn more.
Right, and I want to say Jeremy's back on the line here. I just want to say I think he said he served 18 months and he's got 7 years in front of him. I mean, goodness gracious. Jeremy, are you there? Can you tell me about what happened with you saving the woman on January 6th?
Yeah. So what the side that we were on? So all of the staged violence was in a very small, confined area in that west tunnel. On the east side of the Capitol, which is where me, as well as all of the Oath Keepers that have been accused and convicted of seditious conspiracy, Jessica Watkins, Kelly Meggs, Stuart Rhodes, Kenny Harrelson, Thomas Carl, all of those cats, well, they're all connected to my case. Right? That was my element, my security element. In fact, the famous Stack video that they claimed this is evidence of military training was literally a technique that I said, hey, everybody, put your hands on the shoulder of the person in front of you so we can weave through the thick crowds before we ever entered Capitol grounds. This was a complete mythical, made-up story, right? And yet the very people that were part and the face of this January 6th false flag, the patsies, if you will, all of the detail that I was in. So when they were all arrested immediately in January, February, and March, but I wasn't arrested until September. It wasn't because the FBI hadn't known about my existence. They knew very well about my existence. It's because they knew I had a recording of them attempting to recruit me. So with that as the context, on that west side, there was no violence. There was singing. There was chanting. There was music being played. It was completely peaceful. It wasn't until later in the afternoon that I received a call from Kelly Meggs, who is serving a 12-year prison sentence for seditious conspiracy, which is a joke. All right. He tells me that there are injuries on the west side, and so me and the female Oath Keeper that was with me proceeded along around the Capitol building until we encountered the violence being conducted by the Metro Police Department as well as Capitol Police against unarmed, non-violent American citizens, which can be seen clearly on the body cam footage that features me. Body cam footage where you can see police aggressively utilizing deadly force against elderly, against women that have no protective gear. All they have on are their MAGA hats or their MAGA toboggans. And literally you can hear them saying, hey, don't harm the women. Well, this woman that you referenced was an elderly woman, and I apologize for talking about the young lady's age because I know that's not gentlemanly like. But she was an older woman that had been sprayed at point-blank range with chemical sprays so bad that she had fallen onto the ground. And as you can see in the video, the police had no concern for the fact that she was laying on the ground. They were about to trample her to death. And you can see me saying, hey, guys, hold up. We help her to her feet, and we escort her out into the clear, of which she can't see the entire time. In fact, she probably has no idea who I am or who helped her or anything, because her eyes were literally swollen shut from being sprayed at point-blank range with OC spray. So this was the scene that I arrived to, for which the government is accusing me of engaging in disorderly conduct. But yet the body cam footage confirms that at no time did I raise my voice to these officers, did I make any physical threats to these officers. All I did was, as a Special Forces Master Sergeant who spent his entire life upholding my constitutional oath, I explained to my brothers in arms that they were wrong and that they should look at their actions and what they were doing. And that's what I'm being that's what I'm being accused of in 2 misdemeanor cases. But the more interesting part is I just explained that I have direct ties to all of the worst Oath Keepers. I held a meeting in November of Oath Keepers in which the FBI has confidential human sources reporting as to what I told them. The FBI had contact with me before January 6th, and yet since my arrest on September 30th, 2021, I have never been questioned by a single law enforcement officer of any kind. I've been arrested, whisked away to a jail cell, held bond, and falsely convicted utilizing planted evidence against me. And they hope that the American people never learn my story, and it's taken over 3 years for you to learn my story. This is how effective their military information support operations are.
I remember watching an interview with you, and you said that I think I don't know what the right term is, 4th and 5th generation warfare, information warfare, brain propaganda warfare, mind control, all that stuff. I believe it was you. I remember you saying that's the most effective type of warfare. And of course, we'd all think that it would be conventional warfare, tanks and guns and things of that sort. I think I heard you. Wasn't that you that said that in an interview, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, and this is the key. Look, the key to unconventional warfare is the winning of the hearts and minds. And everybody thinks that that's a frilly phrase. No. Winning the hearts and minds. If you can psychologically manipulate the people, if you can emotionally, which is winning the heart, emotionally manipulate, which the psychological aspect of January 6th is the false narrative. The idea that used car salesmen and fat middle-aged white guys, which the left likes to refer to January 6th as, we're going to use a unarmed overthrow of the United States government and then go out to Olive Garden that night in the D.C. area. No shit. This is exactly what they said. All right? And then the hard aspect of it is you should be afraid. Our democracy is at stake. They are the bad guys. See, the winning of the hearts and minds. This is what the bad guys do utilizing unconventional warfare, and this is what the good guys do utilizing unconventional warfare. And it is much more effective than bullets and bombs and artillery rounds. And if it wasn't effective, then there would be no such thing as the Green Berets, because this is our exact specialty and why John F. Kennedy in 1962 enshrined the importance of the U.S. Army Special Forces by awarding us the Green Beret, right? And so this is not a joke, okay? And if it wasn't effective, it wouldn't be used all over the world to overthrow regime after regime after regime. And this is what Americans are living through right now. The most successful unconventional warfare campaign ever conducted, because most Americans don't even realize that they've been conquered.
Well, the idea that I've been told listening to these, everyone's, I think, elbow deep in understanding military strategies. And what I heard said was that if there's 2 opposing generals, the number one factor that determines who wins that war, that battle between the 2 opposing generals, is whoever wins the support of the people on the land in which the war is happening. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and this is how General David Petraeus made his fame, by simply rewriting Special Forces doctrine as conventional doctrine. And of course, you know, he's a huge fraud like most of the others because he gave classified materials to his mistress who wanted to write it in her book or whatever, and all he got was a slap on the wrist and then a promotion to author and a Fox News contributor and all this other stuff. But see, this is how our government is actually run, right? If you're in the club, you get all the benefits and you can do whatever you want. But if you're a regular American citizen, you're told the lies that your vote counts and that you can just, you know, utilize the judicial system because it's still fair, right? Nothing operates the way that Americans believe it does. And this, again, is part of the psychological aspect of this warfare.
But wouldn't you say, though, I mean, right now we're having a massive awakening amongst the people, and we see a momentum shift to patriotism, to the country. That critical Marxist idea is declining. I mean, doesn't that give you some sort of confidence in our future?
No, because it doesn't matter if every single American person is an anti-Marxist. If all of our leaders are Marxist or communist, it's irrelevant because they will simply utilize the FBI to round up their enemies because the American people still live in this la-la land that the enemy isn't in control and that the next election is going to solve everything. If the American people do not wake up that their government has been taken over by those who are not American in any way, those who believe in a globalist one-world government, those who believe that American sovereignty is outdated, that we should pay a global corporate tax, that climate change is going to kill us all. See, these are all tactics in this unconventional warfare to destroy America. When we have our stated enemies flying spy balloons over our nuclear facilities, when we have the President of the United States sending economic support and humanitarian aid to known terrorist factions under the guise of, oh, this is for the people, when everyone knows that this aid is simply used by the enemies. And yet we see these manufactured protests, just like we saw manufactured protests. Look, they're following the same playbook as 2020. In 2020, it was George Floyd. This summer of love will be the Palestinians, okay? All you have to do is wake up, be knowledgeable about what you're looking at, and accept it as the truth. Because if you listen to the evil people that are running this country right now, they're telling you exactly what they're doing. And yes, you are a threat to their democracy because America is not a democracy.
Hey, Jeremy, we're going to end on that note. I appreciate you calling in. I appreciate your hour. I appreciate everything that you've done for the country. I want to tell everybody, call your congressman, even the Democrats. Call Sheila Jackson Lee. Call Republican Troy Nehls. Tell them to get our January 6th political prisoners. Tell them to get Jeremy Brown out of prison, out of this political prison that they're in. We have to liberate our patriots. All right, Jeremy, thank you again. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Chris, if you don't mind, can I plug my Defense Fund site?
Please go.
Because we are in an ongoing judicial battle.
Yes,
it
please.
Is JeremyBrownDefense.com, JeremyBrownDefense.com, or you can use the hashtag #WhoIsJeremyBrown and help out any way you can because we are utilizing every asset available to take this fight and expose this military coup against the American people.
And Jeremy's done more than 20 years of service defending our country, and now he's facing 7 more years in prison. So if you can chip in and help Jeremy out in any way, shape, or form, make those calls, we would appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy. Have a good day, G2. Thank you, G2. You guys have a good day. This is Chris Heasley. We'll check in next week. Bye-bye.